Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking at this article from the Associated Press. It's called Save Yourself, America. And it's all about how black women are reacting after the fictional re-election of Donald Trump in 2024.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah. And, black women have always been such a powerful force in
Yeah.
the, political and social movements in this country. So it's really interesting to see the article suggesting that maybe
Yeah.
there's a shift happening in how they think about activism.
Absolutely. It's a really crucial perspective to consider,
Yeah.
especially given that black women have consistently been on the front lines of so many movements. To see a potential shift like the one the article talks about, it's definitely something we should be exploring in detail.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if you noticed this, but the article opens up with this anecdote about Tasia Smith.
Yeah.
And when she's asked about participating in another women's march, she actually kind of chuckles. If you remember, these marches were huge during Trump's first term. So her reaction really got me thinking, is this like a sign of fatigue or even like disillusionment with the whole political process?
Yeah, it's definitely possible. And the article goes on to talk about this feeling of disappointment among a lot of black women. A lot of them really put their all into this election. A lot of them were hoping for that historic win for Kamala Harris. And when that didn't happen, it seems like it kind of triggered this wave of, what the article calls dismay,
Yeah.
and maybe even a need to rethink how they're involved politically.
I could see that. It makes you wonder, like, what was it all for? I think we've all felt that kind of burnout at some point.
Yeah.
And you put so much of yourself into something and then
Yeah.
it just doesn't turn out how you hoped it would.
Absolutely. And that sense of disillusionment is even stronger when you think about the historical context. Black women have often been the ones leading the charge for social change. They've carried a really heavy burden. So to see their candidate lose after all that effort, I can only imagine how disheartening that must feel.
Yeah, for sure. And then the article brings up this concept of a black women rest movement. It's basically this idea that they're choosing to put self-care and their mental health above constant political activism. But it almost feels radical, doesn't it? Just like step back from the fight.
It is, in a way, but I think it's really important to understand why this is happening. The article talks about how some black women feel like, despite all their effort, like their concerns just aren't being heard. Like they're the only ones carrying the weight of social progress. And they're tired of making sacrifices for a nation that doesn't seem to care as much as they do.
Right. And, there's this quote from Latosha Brown. She's the co-founder of Black Voters Matter. And she says, America is going to have to save herself. I mean, that's powerful.
Right.
It's like she's saying, we've done our part. Now is your turn.
Yeah, that's a great point. It really highlights this desire to not be martyrs for a nation that hasn't fully addressed their needs. And what's even more striking is that this is all happening against the backdrop of black women being the backbone of so many movements.
Yeah.
From suffrage to civil rights to Black Lives Matter, they've always been at the forefront fighting for progress, even when it was incredibly difficult.
Yeah, and yet here we are seeing this potential pullback from that leadership role. It's kind of unsettling. And to add to that, the article cites data from AP Vocast. It shows that black women were actually the most concerned about the future of democracy in this election.
That's right, which makes their potential decision to step back even more significant. It raises a really important question. What happens when the group that's usually leading the way decides to take a break? What happens to the momentum? Is this just a pause, or is it something more permanent?
Big questions. And, before we go any further, I want to ask you listening, have you ever felt that kind of burnout? Like you put so much effort into something and it just didn't work out how you wanted it?
It's a common feeling for sure, and it's important to remember that even the most dedicated people and groups need time to recharge and figure out what to do next. It's not about giving up, it's about finding a better way forward.
Exactly. And that's where the article gets even more interesting, because it starts talking about how there are actually different opinions within the black community itself about this whole rest movement.
Yeah, it's important to remember that not all black women feel the same way about this. The article talks about this woman, Tanita Taylor. She actually voted for Trump. And for her, it was all about the economy. She felt like Trump's policies would give her family a better shot at financial stability, even if it meant, maybe overlooking some other concerns.
Yeah, that's a perspective you don't always hear about. But it's a good reminder that people's experiences and priorities can be really different, even within the same group.
Exactly. And then the article brings up another woman, Olivia Gordon. She's a lawyer, and she's actually worried about this black women rest movement. She thinks that if too many black women step back from politics, it could end up hurting them in the long run. Like, who's going to fight for their needs if they're not involved?
So you have this internal debate happening, right?
Hmm.
Some feeling like they need to take a break, and others worried about what might happen if they do.
It's complicated for sure. And to help us understand all of this, the article brings in a therapist named Nicole Lewis. She specializes in working with Black women and stress.
Oh, that's interesting. I always find it helpful to hear from therapists on these kinds of issues.
Me too. So Lewis acknowledges that there could be some negative consequences if Black women pull back from politics. She says they've made a lot of progress advocating for themselves and for social change, and stepping back could put that progress at risk. But she also says that this could be an opportunity. Like maybe this is the moment when other groups have to step up
Oh,
and start taking more responsibility for addressing social issues.
that's a good point. Like, if Black women take a step back, does that force other people to fill that void? Could this actually lead to a bigger shift in who's responsible for making change happen?
It's definitely possible, and it brings us back to that powerful quote from Latosha Brown. This ain't our reckoning. I don't feel no guilt.
Uh,
It's like she's drawing a line, saying she's not going to carry the weight of the world on her shoulders anymore.
it's a powerful image.
Hmm.
For so long, Black women have been expected to be the ones leading the fight for equality and justice, and often they've paid a big price for it. Brown's statement is like she's saying enough is enough. It's time for others to step up.
Yeah, it really makes you think about how social change actually happens and who's responsible for making it happen.
For sure.
This whole conversation has been about Black women and their activism, but I feel like it brings up a bigger question for all of us.
Absolutely.
Like, what happens when the people who've been leading the fight for so long decide to step back?
Yeah, it's a question we all need to think about.
Right.
Will other groups see that as a signal to step up and share the responsibility? Or will things just stall out? Will we see a lack of progress on these important issues?
It's the big question, isn't it?
It really is.
And you know what I think is so interesting about this article? It doesn't give us any easy answers, but it definitely gets you thinking about the future of social change in America.
It really does.
You know-
It makes you look at yourself and ask, am I just watching all this happen? Or am I actually doing something to make things better?
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
I do.
And it's not just about this election
Mm.
or even about this particular moment in time. It's about something bigger.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Social movements aren't static,
They're always changing.
Exactly. They evolve, they shift, they might even pull back for a bit.
And those shifts can have a huge impact.
Yeah. They could affect the direction of progress for years to come.
It's true.
So I guess the question is, where do we go from here? What have we learned from this deep dive?
Well, first of all, I think it's a reminder that we need to listen, especially to the people who've been marginalized and ignored for so long. We need to understand their experiences and what motivates them.
Right.
And then we have to look at ourselves. What are we doing to create a more just and equitable world?
It's not enough to just sit back and watch.
No, it's not.
We have to be active participants. And we also have to remember that social change takes time.
It's a marathon, not a sprint.
Exactly. There will be times when it feels like nothing's changing, times when you get tired and discouraged.
That's inevitable.
But you can't lose sight of the bigger picture.
You have to keep going.
And remember that even small steps forward are still steps forward.
Absolutely.
I think this article also reminds us that there's no one right way to be an activist.
Different things work for different people.
What matters is finding a way to engage that feels meaningful to you.
And that you can sustain over time.
Exactly.
So yeah, I think this deep dive has given us a lot to think about,
For sure.
a lot to reflect on as we continue to figure out our own roles in all of this.
Absolutely. And to everyone listening, I highly recommend checking out the full article from the Associated Press. It's called Save Yourself America. It's really worth a read. Think about the historical context, the different perspectives that are out there, and what this potential shift in Black women's activism could mean for the future of social movements in America. And most importantly, think about what role you want to play in shaping that future. Because this is a story that's still being written, and we all have a part in it